Hi, this is Tom Zimmerman from the EMDR podcast. This is a very short, almost little outtake that is a tip about something that you can do just before closure that's so much more helpful in many cases than going straight to a resource. So if we think about EMDR as a dive, it's often a dive down into distress. Things pivot, and then the client starts to come up. Another way to think of that is, the difficult stuff has to connect to right now adaptive information. It's moving, this link up has happened. However, imagine a session where we've just run out of time. There's just, that this memory is not going to close in the time that we have, and we're getting pretty close to time to do closure. One of the things that you might do, which is the kind of standard guidance, is just kind of intervene and say, okay, we're running out of time. Let's go ahead and use some resource to get that residual distress down. You can do that. There is another option, though, particularly if the client has dived down and they are coming up, meaning your sense is that the distress is getting lower and lower and lower. And, maybe the SUDS is a 5, maybe the SUDS is a 4, maybe the SUDS a little while ago was a 5, and now it's a 3, but again, it's time for closure. One of the things you might do is simply ask the client to close the memory channel. You can encourage the client. I call this little technique, noticing the rest of the way up. So again, you would do this in a case in which the client's not, you do this in a case not when the client is stuck. And you wouldn't do this in a case where the client is still noticing down, meaning the client's still deep, deep, deep in the distress. But rather when your sense is that the client's coming up, and maybe if we had another 10 or 15 minutes, this target might actually close. So what you can do is ask the client to just close the memory channel. We're not going to think about that memory anymore. We're running out of time. And instead, let's do several sets where you just notice whatever is residual in your body. And fast tapping, we just spend at least a few sets noticing without the possibility of new content coming in. And when you do that, very often you will make a 5, a 3, or you'll make a 4, a 2, or a 1, and it is reprocessing. We're not actually, the client is noticing the residual distress, which is metabolizing that memory into adaptive information. But we think of it as a kind of bridge to resource that's a little bit more elegant than simply this very sharp right turn. Okay, I know you were deeply in this. Let's kind of throw you a life raft, pull you out of that hole. So if you spend simply a few sets with the memory channel closed, with the thought channel closed, and simply noticing any residual distress in the body and noticing it pretty concretely, notice the shape of it, notice the inside of it, and you do that for just a few sets, you've only burned a couple of minutes, and it's very likely to, number one, continue them coming up. So whatever processing they do in those few sets of noticing is likely to be retained. It's also likely to be lowering the SUDS at the same time. So the goal, and really when we, if we're gonna often end the session with a resource, if we've just spent 2 sets of fast tapping and noticing, we haven't really used that much time, and there's still time for another resource or 2. So again, consider when the clients dive down and come up, but there just isn't time for them to get the rest of the way up in this session, consider closing the channels that might cause activation and just notice bodily distress. Now, if what they're noticing gets worse, pivot to a resource. If what they're noticing isn't really moving or shifting or changing, then pivot to a resource. But very, very rarely, when you ask the client to close the channels that may cause activation, does more activation come in? And I would say 95% of the time, simply noticing whatever residual distress will take 2 or 3 units out of the body base sides. So again, we're checking the body base sides. We're not checking the distress that's in that memory, because that's just going to cause a bunch more activation, which is what we're not trying to do in this. So think about that. Try that. See if it works. It's something I've been doing for a while, and it's just elegant. It's easier. It's moving in the direction that things are already moving, and it can, in just a couple of sets of continuing reprocessing on the body channel, it can make your closure easier, because you're going into closure with even less distress than you might be if you just jump straight to a resource. So give it a try, be in touch, let me know what your experience is. Thank you.